We're talking about educational platforms in the carbon removal space. So we have two. We've got John Sanchez, one of our very own, a regular on these calls, who I'm really excited to hear the story of how he came to conceptualize and launch so sort of quickly and stealthily the Carbon Removal Academy, which is great, and I've actually shared that with a number of folks. Anshuman is a founder with Terra.do, which is, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, more of a climate change related educational platform that does require payment. So that's, he's actually got, I think John's sort of open source at this point. Anshuman's making a business out of this, but both are in that educational space. And to me, to get where we need to be in the carbon removal space, we need way more people, way more heads in this space. So anything we can do to educate and sort of build that army, whether people are doing filmmaking or developing new metal organic framework technologies, or developing some element of code that brings money and investment into various carbon removal platforms. There are so many angles. So this is just one that we're going to explore. And I think this is sort of like high up on sort of the entry point, or the funnel of how to get people into this space. So first you got to educate them and help them understand. I happen to be married to a sustainability director here. She's sustainability director for Boulder County. They do a lot of wonderful work. And I know, I've worked in the energy efficiency and basically decarbonization space for years. And it's amazing just, I guess, how focused they are on decarbonization, and maybe just sort of barely starting to get into this world of carbon removal at this point. So I think the education is so critical, because if you look at the IPCC reports, we really should be shifting our focus in a very directed way towards carbon removal versus turning off the tap or decarbonizing the economy as it is. So the more we can accelerate that shift, the better. Education is an incredible way to do that. So I'm excited to hear about sort of the similarities, the differences, what John and Anshuman are up to. And I think format-wise, we're just going to give them 10, 15 minutes each. I've got some questions teed up, but as always, those are just kind of ways to get the conversation flowing. And at that point, we will, if you guys have questions while they're talking, write them down, and we'll fire away some questions and aim to take up an hour. Or if folks have a little more time, we can go hour 15 if we want, and we'll jump in. So I'm going to give Anshuman the floor first. Let him introduce himself. What is he doing at Terra.do, and we'll flip it over to John.
Thank you, Jeremy. And hi, everyone. Good to see people who are kind of really focused on this space showing up bright and early, at least bright and early for me on the Pacific West Coast. So quickly, my background, I have been mostly a tech entrepreneur, internet entrepreneur most of my life. Started my first company during the first internet boom and bust. So I have some experience starting companies in bad times. And then sold that, and was at business school here at Stanford, which is where I'm back again now. This time courtesy my wife, who's doing a PhD here. And then was in Google for a few years, in New York, in consulting for a few years, and then moved back to India 10 years ago to focus, to start another tech company. The I sold that company to India's largest online travel company. Kind of think of it like an Expedia. And I was the chief product officer for the past 4 years. It's a publicly listed company, so it was a lot of fun just going back to Wall Street every quarter and trying to figure out how to kind of convince them that this is still the next big thing. Of course, the company, post-COVID especially, my stock hasn't really done as well, as you can imagine, for everything related to travel. But about a year back, I started thinking about, almost like a midlife crisis, right? Which is that how do you figure out how to spend the next 10, 15 years of your life, even more if needed, to solve a problem that I really cared about. And all of us have our different moments of epiphany. Mine was kids and something that happened, which kind of just brought my entire attention and focus on climate change. And I spent maybe the next 6 to 9 months just reading up and talking to many, many people in the space, and everything from deep tech, nuclear fusion, all the way to environmental justice and everything in between, trying to figure out what was at the intersection of something that might have an impact on climate, given the urgency, but also something that I could do uniquely well. And honestly, the couple of things that really struck me, one was that there were many more people like me. And I don't know how many of you are would also raise your hands to something like that, but many people like me who were trying to figure out how to ramp up quickly and get productive in this space and start solving a problem that really mattered. And the second was just kind of this macro perspective, which is that, I mean, if you're talking about fundamentally changing our energy systems, agriculture, manufacturing, transportation, and not just in a country like the US or developed countries, but also in developing countries like India, and all of that in like 10 years, which is a historical transformation that has never ever happened in our life, in our entire history before. That's not going to happen with the few hundreds of thousands or maybe 1 million or 2 people who are doing white collar jobs in climate right now. So that number would have to become, one way or the other, it'll have to become 100 million or some such large number spread across the planet. So that was where we started out from, saying, look, one way or the other, we'll have to transition people into climate work. And the transition could sometimes be very binary, which is you quit what you're doing right now and you go join a climate organization, right? But it could be all shades of that. And including, for example, my favorite example, which is, and we have one such a person in our cohort right now, essentially realizing that you might be a bond trader on Wall Street and suddenly you realize that climate risk is so deeply baked into your portfolio that if you just want to be good at your job, you need to understand what's going on. So that's where we started out. In the process, I met my co-founder, Kamal, who lives in Hawaii, and as is very appropriate for the times, we've never met in real life. So her background is thankfully entirely climate and education, in fact. So she's she's in energy, so she's worked across both the US, India, UK, with solar developers, with think tanks, and is otherwise mostly of academic bent. So she's a PhD from Berkeley and taught climate change at Oxford for many years. But she also taught climate change to high schoolers. And that, I think, that combination of what she knows and does and how she thinks, and a little bit about my whole thinking around scale and being as broad-based as possible, is what we're trying to combine in Terra. And so Terra.do is, the idea is fairly straightforward, which is it's an online platform that will allow millions of people to transition into climate work. And our first entry point for that is learning. And that first entry point is large enough, big enough, and I'll tell you more about that. But the company itself is not very old, less than 6 months. We run a 12-week online boot camp, which takes people like me and takes them through this ramp up map into everything climate. So not just carbon removal, but everything climate. And then at the end of that program, we try to get them plugged into all kinds of interesting climate opportunities. And sometimes they could be even entrepreneurial opportunities. In fact, one of the interesting things that happened with our first cohort was that somebody who had started out as an online education entrepreneur ended up becoming a green hydrogen entrepreneur in like 10 weeks. And I don't know how to replicate that over and over again, but that's where we are. And our model has been that, maybe we can talk a little bit more about that in the end. But yeah, so that's where we are. So we are in our second cohort right now. Our entire team is distributed, which is exactly what we're trying to prove also with Terra.do. So we have 8 people across 6 different time zones, all the way spanning from Hawaii to Hong Kong. And that's what our cohort looks like as well. So I can answer more questions, but I'll pause there.
And I'll just ask one question, then maybe we'll let John kind of talk through, and then I'll jump into a collective Q&A session. But Anshuman, can you talk a little bit about how carbon removal factors into as part of the climate change education process with Terra?
Yeah, so we have an entire class which is devoted to carbon removal, and we talk about it in all kinds of different ways. So, for example, we have both the literature part of it, which is talking about what's our latest understanding of what the cost curves for different kinds of direct air capture technologies, for example, look like. But we also talk about it in terms of what are the policy and regulatory frameworks getting developed around the world, which might gave a jump shot to something like this. So, and the way we kind of cap that is that there is a expert speaker who comes out, who's either a technologist or a policy person who has looked at this pretty closely and talks about their experience in getting this out into the market and what they see the landscape as right now.
Excellent. I've got a lot of questions, but I think I want to let John kind of talk a little bit about the Carbon Removal Academy, and then I think a lot of the questions that we would have for you, Anshuman, might also be things that we want to hear John on as well. So maybe I will, at this point, flip it over to John Sanchez of the Carbon Removal Academy. And John, tell us how you came up with this. What are we doing with Carbon Removal Academy? And yeah, tell us your story in 15 minutes or less.
Thanks for the link there. So yeah, Carbon Removal Academy, as it currently stands, is a guided curriculum of pre-existing resources. So that's very different from, for example, the Terra.do model or some other things you'll see online, because as of now, at least, we're not trying to produce our own content. We're trying to assemble the best content online, and towards a very specific audience too, where it's accessible. So the right level of difficulty and engagement for the audience that we're sort of targeting, at the right level of detail. So there are different tracks, as it sort of says there on the page at the bottom, where you can sort of choose how much or how deep you want to go, especially within each sort of carbon removal methodology. And there are discrete modules, so you could sort of focus your attention on individual pieces of the carbon removal story. So in terms of how all of that got started, a lot of it was just me showing my work. I mean, I was doing a lot of reading about carbon removal. I only got into this space about 2-3 months ago. So it was, I was reading, I was listening to a lot of these podcasts, reading papers, whatever it was, and finding that navigating this space is difficult. It's already cluttered with podcast episodes, blog posts, books, papers, YouTube explainer videos, whatever. So it's hard to know, especially when you're getting started, what to listen to, what order to go in, what's good quality, what's right for my specific interests. So again, the goal is to sort of put that pre-existing content into a narrative and sort of use it to tell a story that makes sense, and also is engaging, so the person wants to keep learning and continuing sort of down the pipeline that Jeremy started with in his intro. But so I think the insight there that's sort of tied in is that a lot of the content that already exists and that is easy to find is either very high level, so maybe explainers from a company about what they're working on their website, or overview YouTube videos on what climate change is and why it's a problem. And then sort of on the flip side, there are sort of in-depth scientific papers that as detailed and good as they are, like for someone who's sort of at stage 1 or 2 out of 5 on their progression into learning about climate change and carbon removal more specifically, might be too high of like an activation barrier to jump over in order to dive into the space. So trying to navigate that barrier is sort of key. And anyway, the insight is sort of bridging that divide. So it's not too detailed and not too high level, not too technical, but not too just up in the air. But rather sort of that intermediate content, which I found is often filled by like podcasts or webinars where experts explain their thinking, but without, going into the minutia of their data sometimes. And then you can always follow that up with the paper afterwards. But sort of that's what the content currently is. And feel free to ask questions. The other aspect is building trust. So part of what I've tried to do, and you can sort of see it on the page that's currently up on the screen, is like adding timestamps, different levels, commentary underneath each and every resource. So the goal is to build trust. It's like, creating a relationship between the creator of the site, which is me, and the people going through it, that they're actually going to get what they signed up for here. Like, explaining this is exactly a discrete amount of time or investment that you'll have to put in. And if you put this in, this is what you'll get out. And by understanding that sort of pipeline, people, I think, are more likely to put in that necessary investment to get started. The other thing I want to mention in terms of what's currently going on in terms of Carbon Removal Academy is we have a cohort going right now, a discussion cohort. It was launched thanks to Asa, who's sometimes here, but I guess isn't today. But what we've done so far, and again, I think this is part of Terra.do's sort of key philosophy too, is that when you're learning about climate change, one of the key things is that it's kind of lonely to be reading all these papers on your own and to be sort of in this world without much engagement, which is why a place like Airminers is so great in the first place. Like, we're all coming together to have these sorts of discussions together. But sort of inherent in having an educational platform, I think, is necessitates having a place where people can convene on that and ask each other questions and share ideas. So that was sort of the idea behind the cohort. We've had 2 meetings so far. We've been doing bi-weekly meetings every other week, where each week is tied to a specific module. So we've done 1 and 2. 1 was the big picture overview, and 2 was on soil carbon and regenerative agriculture. So that community's been really good. Each meeting's had about 15 people there. So good discussion, kind of a big group in terms of, each person is not speaking all that much. So we've considered having like breakout rooms or different models for chatting, but it's been good. The other thing that has really worked in terms of the cohort is sort of convening people of different backgrounds to think about a specific topic. So an example from this past week's soil meeting was just that we had a particle physicist on in the soil meeting. We had someone who's thinking about starting a company that relates to remote sensing of soil carbon, like how much is sequestered. And we had a business person, more traditionally. So almost sort of as a diversion to where the chat was going in terms of the more specific science and details, people were, the 3 of them just sort of started going on a tangent about how you could apply particle physics science as a means to understand remote sensing and verification and quantification of soil carbon from a business perspective. So they sort of riffed upon that for a little bit, but then they sort of created a chat to talk outside. So bringing people together from different backgrounds while focusing it on this content has been pretty successful. And then I guess sorry?
Sorry to interrupt. Where do those discussion groups occur? If anyone's interested, just giving you a chance for a quick plug there.
As in, if people, well, they're all on Zoom. We have, if anybody wants to join, you're all welcome. We have our next one 2 weeks from now. We have a Slack group and we have an email chain that sort of alternate as the means of communication, which could definitely be more organized, and we're sort of getting there. But yes, right now there's no clear way to get involved, but feel free to send me a note if you're interested in joining the group.
Okay, great. Sorry, and I cut you off.
Yeah, just the last part was sort of the why, which I think Anshuman touched upon pretty well, which is sort of helping people answer the question, like, what can I do to contribute to the climate crisis? And the main answers to that question that I've seen are, like, number 1, you can get a job. It sort of fits in with that 80,000 hours philosophy, like align your career with things that make a difference in this world. But then the question becomes, and I think this is really one of the central questions behind any educational platform that's sort of targeted at this specific audience, which is sort of, what baseline knowledge do you need in order to be able to apply your current skill set to a climate framework? So you already have this skill, say it's software development, say it's, finance, whatever it is. So from there, are you willing to just go jump in and work for climate? So I think 2 of the things that you need to do are have the motivation. So if you don't care about climate, you're not going to go change your career path to go work on a climate cause. So you need to make them care. And then, is there any background material that you need to sort of acquire in order to be sort of competent and conversational in this space? So I think that's sort of a key question to answer that we might want to discuss. And then also there's entrepreneurship. I think a lot of the audience that I've seen in the cohorts, in terms of the people I've talked to that have used the platform, are entrepreneurs, people or aspiring carbon removal entrepreneurs. So people have said things like, I'm a business person. I'd love to get involved in the carbon removal space. I'm ideating, but I want to get smart about the tech. Or I want to learn just enough so that when I get a technical co-founder, for example, like, I'll be able to have competent conversations. I'll be able to understand what's going on so I can, direct things as they need to go. so entrepreneurs is a key audience. And then there are things that I've thought about, like how do you engage activists with something like this? But that's sort of a different point that we can get to later. But I think that's enough for an overview, and we can get to the questions.
That's great. Thank you, John. And I mean, I'll kick things off. I mean, obviously some slightly different models here, John. I don't know if you have any plans to monetize this. I mean, you're sort of at a different point in your life. You're younger, and maybe that's not a necessity today. Anshuman's built, I assume it's a for-profit entity, and with revenue. But maybe I'll just kind of kick things off with a question that does apply to both of you. Where do your students come from? As in, where are you acquiring new customers? Your customers are your students, and where are they physically? Are they scattered all around the world? So kind of a two-part question. Anshuman, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. In fact, by the way, for what it's worth, that was my biggest surprise when we launched this. Coming from the background that I did, our thinking was that we would need to create some kind of a mini marketplace, almost supply and demand matching, where we'll get a certain type of people, and then there would be demand for their skills in the climate world. And the obvious, given my background, was that we'll find software engineers and software type people who would be congregating on something like Terra for our program. And then once we train them, they would be available for everyone else. The people who showed up were completely different. Which is exactly how early stage startups work. So in our first cohort and our subsequent cohort, we have had our cluster of tech and investing clients. So for example, we had Techstars SVP and partner Cody, who joined us in our first cohort. We have someone else in India who's looking at doing clean tech investing and has been a very well-known investor in India, who's come on in our second cohort. We've also had a bunch of different internet entrepreneurs or tech entrepreneurs. So the one example that I gave you was this guy called Sean, who had been an online ed entrepreneur. He had run one of the largest online coding boot camps before this. We also had someone who was at Google pre-IPO, has been there for 15, 16 plus years, and is now looking to build like a very large scale software focused company in climate. So there's definitely that cluster of people. But that turned out to be maybe 20% of all the people who showed up. So we also have, for example, a pretty large cluster of people who are either activists, full-time activists or part-time activists, who are now, who have always had kind of this second life, which was how they paid their bills. And the realization is that, look, maybe what I've been doing all this while, which was supposedly completely separate from climate, now intersects deeply enough for me to get combine the two. So for example, we had this guy who was an astrophysicist by day and an activist with Extinction Rebellion by night, and who is now kind of completely switched that career into something like this. We've had a bunch of people in India who have been working on digital rights and social inclusion, who now realize that what they're doing could potentially be brought into the climate/environment and sustainability space as well. Then there is a third interesting set of clusters, which is people who have had their lives already affected by climate and their professional life. So for example, we have this one guy from Brazil who is a disaster relief worker, who flies out to, every time there's a tropical cyclone or a hurricane, he goes out, and his expertise is logistics. And he's realizing that he is doing this far more often simply because climate is a big driver of these things. We've had someone else who's a oil and gas executive at Chevron in Australia, who has had both an attack of conscientiousness, but also realizing that oil and gas is a sunset industry now. So therefore trying to figure out what is the clean tech version of his skills that might make sense. Same as the example of the bond trader that I mentioned to you, who's at Wall Street. So far, I mean, we have 9 different countries across, and people, typically the people who show up are mid-career. So I think our roughly 70% are between 10 plus years in our cohort. And where we get them, to your original question, Jeremy, is that there are all these micro communities that a lot of you are already would be familiar with, besides Airminers. So there's My Climate Journey, which is a podcast turned into this very interesting community. Then there is Climate Action Tech, which is some 2,000 plus software engineers and so on. And then there are these pockets that exist all across the world that either we have reached out to, or somebody has heard about us. And now as the cohort grows, which is, I think, the power of actually the online education model, which is that if you do a good job with that, then there's a lot of referral loops, a lot of good word that gets around. I wanted to show you a couple of things that people have done where they've actually taken their entire experience with the program and broadcast it to their networks, and others hear about it and so on. So I think that's how we're acquiring more and more users right now.
Excellent, thanks. Yeah, John, are you purely, I mean, clearly you're dipping into the Airminers population here, which makes a ton of sense, but where else are you seeing people accessing the Carbon Removal Academy from?
Yeah, so I definitely think, as Anshuman said, the Slack groups have been very helpful. So Airminers, My Climate Journey has gotten a lot of people. I think that's where the majority of the current cohort was found. I think there's like a latent carbon removal community there that's sort of not quite as engaged as it is on Airminers, but still like interested in learning more, which just sort of happened to be who we were looking for the first cohort. But also on Reddit, there were people that expressed interest, other social media, and I think people just brought friends in. And as I've talked to people, they've been like, "Oh yeah, that sounds cool, I'll join," or people have shared it around. So, I haven't really, especially since I'm not, making any money off of this at this point. Like, it's not like I'm actively going out and trying to recruit people to join. It's just sort of a resource that's spread by interest and necessity, I think. And this becomes a different story. I guess later we'll touch on where I might go from here and their ideas. But at least for now, the types of people that are there are mid-career, many looking for a transition, same sort of thing. A lot more entrepreneurs than I expected. So really people who are looking to get involved themselves and make a dent in the carbon removal space, which seems to be a big theme. There's also a surprising number of experts who are interested. Like, I was genuinely surprised. There are like maybe 3 or 4 out of the 20 total people who are currently in the Slack group, at least, that are like genuinely know far more than I about carbon removal in all aspects. So, I mean, it's interesting also how well they've sort of jammed with the more beginner type people who are just learning for the first time. The conversations that have happened between those two sort of demographics and experience levels have, rather than sort of hindering the progress, made it very rich, and so it's been a great dynamic. But yeah, like I said, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people looking to pivot their career. That seems to be the general theme.
Yeah, it seems like a similarity with both of you, and it's just music to my ears to hear that there are very capable people looking to switch their careers into something that marries their passion and their reason for being with the way to make a living too, because they don't certainly have to be exclusive ventures. So let's talk revenue models for a second. Anshuman, can you tell us? I don't want to dig too deep, but whatever you're comfortable talking about is as far as how are you keeping the business afloat? And you kind of launched with $9.99 as the number to get through the course, and how are things going with that? And yeah, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. In fact, I thought maybe I'll just preface that just a little bit by showing you what the experience looks like for someone who's paying $9.99, just to give you a better sense, because I mean, everyone has kind of their own ways of doing it. And just, if I may share my screen.
Sure, I might have to make you a host. I know that helps.
Yeah, that's not the problem. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm happy to go deep because frankly, there's not much that we know ourselves so far, so we're still discovering. So we'd love to both hear feedback and ideas from everyone else here.
Yeah, a little show and tell would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. So this is the site that you've seen. So now what happens is that when you so this is where the entire description of the program is, and what we do is that we have, for example, a couple of free classes that you can try out. Then the key aspects of the program is that one is that we have these office hours. So what we do is that every cohort, no matter how big it is broken up into groups of 20 people each, and not more than 20 ever. And each of those 20 people has a teaching instructor who's associated with them. And our teaching instructors, for example, right now is somebody who's just finished a PhD from Berkeley. Another one who's this astrophysicist person that I told you about has graduated from our cohort and has become an instructor for us. So what they do is that with their entire 20 people group, they do office hours twice a week. And their one part often gets used over Zoom, by the way. So one part gets used for assignments and discussions of topics, but the other part gets typically used by the fellows themselves, as we call our students, the fellows themselves, to talk about the ideas and the projects that they're working on. And it becomes this very interesting peer-to-peer feedback session. Then there are group projects that the entire team gets, and I'll show you a few of those. And one-on-one assistance, which is always available on our community platform. So we were on Slack. We just switched to a different platform because Slack was not scaling well for us. Then we have this very interesting model of mentorship. So what we've done is that we have signed up roughly 40 to 50 mentors across the world right now in all space and climate spaces. And their backgrounds are typically they're 2 to 10 years in their climate work. And you can set up a half an hour session with them at any point in time using a Calendly link. And then use that connection that you have with them to take that relationship further. And that's how, for example, Sean, who was the hydrogen entrepreneur, he leveraged this mentor network really extensively to do his customer discovery. And then, of course, we have this community, which I'll show you in just a bit, that also lives used to live on Slack. We kind of just moved it to a different platform right now. So one thing that I wanted to show you was just a little bit of what we've built. So there are, and for those of you who are product minded, this was something which I was really pained about, which is that there are learning management systems like dime a dozen, like literally hundreds of them out there. And yet we had to build our own because they're also overbuilt beyond belief, which I hated. I don't want to write a single line of code if I can help it. But we have a simple learning management system. This is the course page that everyone who's been accepted into the program gets to. And all these classes get unlocked. Sorry, 1 second. Tulika? These are, so the classes get unlocked once every week. And I just want to show you what the classes look like. And as you can see, this is very broad-based scope, right? So, I mean, economics of climate change and global politics and justice through 2 classes. So you can imagine how 80,000 feet it could get. But it gets very intense. So we deep dive very, very quickly. And so this is what a class looks like. And this is something which we struggled with because our original conception was that we would actually cobble together interesting links and material which is already out there and put some commentary on top of that. But it just felt like it wasn't flowing as well together, and especially when we were looking at something as broad as everything in climate. So what you'll see here is that it's a custom interface that we have made, which is, think of it like a glorified slideshow or like a New York Times Magazine article. And so, for example, this one is about, so Kamal, this is my co-founder. She'll introduce what the program is. This particular class is going to be about. And then we'll deep dive into something like wind right away. And so this video, for example, would come from an external source, which is talking about how quickly turbine technology is moving. And then you move to a research paper that talks about what the cost of energy through wind could look like in just the span over the next 5 years or so. So the idea is to actually get you start thinking about how quickly this is moving, and and then there are assignments and stuff like that that people can do. So that's what a class looks like. The entire community lives on Slack, which all of us are pretty familiar with. And what we do is that we also invite our mentors and our alums into the same community. So over a period of time, the hope is that we will have this very large community of people who might have come from all kinds of different directions, but now have access to this massive network all across the world. we have one of my favorite is this assignment that we do, which I mean, just like raises the hair at the back of my neck every time I read it. So our pre-assignment before the program even starts is that it's the year 2040 and the climate crisis is over. Describe what happened and the role that you played in it. And the reason why this is important is because, I mean, for those of you familiar with maybe a business school program or places where they get you to vision your career, in a way, this is kind of a pre-vision. You're kind of foreshadowing what might happen. And over the course of the next 12 weeks, we try to get you to come back to it again and again on what your specific thinking about both the path to action and your own specific role would look like. So what happens at the end of it is that by the end of the 12-week program, we want you to graduate with a work plan. And that work plan is very specific. It kind of, so there are 2-3 aspects of it, which is that one, you've developed it in partnership with a bunch of different mentors that you have been speaking to. And you then identify a buddy, both in the program and a mentor, who is going to keep you accountable once you graduate from the program to stick to your work plan or keep modifying it as you learn more. So that is kind of one of those things that we really care about, because as I keep saying that we're not Terra.learn, we're Terra.do. So if after graduating, you go back to what you've been doing without that emphasis on shifting into climate work, then we have failed. So therefore, we're trying to figure out how best to track that, how best to make sure that once you graduate from the program, you are you're acting on what you're intended to do, and so on. And the last thing I just want to show, and I'm sorry if I'm just kind of rushing this a little bit, but in the interest of time, was that what we're trying to do is that we are trying to become kind of this starting point for all climate learning, or a lot of climate learning. And so therefore, the reason I showed you this entire platform is from a business model standpoint, which is think of us as, yes, as an online education company like a Udacity charging $999 for its own specific program. But think of us also as a teachable.com, which is a platform that's saying, look, we're not a marketplace. We're not trying to be a Udemy, but we do want all this amazing climate learning where in the heads of all these people all across the world who have been educating or communicating in some shape or form to start living on Terra, in which case we'll take care of the technology, we'll take care of the community, we'll take care of a lot of things that are the paraphernalia above and below it. So for example, we have a new hydrogen program, which is starting on October 5th, which is a 4-week program just focused on the new hydrogen economy. And this is being built by a couple of people that I had mentioned. So Sean is the educational entrepreneur, who's turned into a hydrogen entrepreneur. And Nevco here is a pretty well-known guy in the hydrogen community. And Janice runs this hydrogen consulting company called Stratagen. And this is something that we're going to try out. We have another program which is hopefully getting started, which is around climate journalism. And starting out actually from India and the global south, because that's where climate journalism is in its infancy right now. And there are a couple of people who are passionate journalists and climate scientists who've gotten together to build this program on top of Terra. So that's what we're trying to do from a business model standpoint, which is to build kind of this teachable that allows any climate entrepreneur, any climate communicator to come and sit and have their program run on top of this.
So Anshuman, I love the envisioning 2040 exercise. It's very powerful just to even start to think about that. It seems like you're creating a community that lives on much longer than the actual coursework. Like you want to keep people engaged maybe for a lifetime. And is there some thought around there also of just creating lifetime value around the customers by saying, hey, we've got a new thing, or hey, there's this new thing that we didn't know about, a year ago, but now it's so important. We're going to create a course around it. And, obviously it's an easy sell to folks that are engaged.
Yeah, no, I think, and honestly, this is something that, Jeremy, that we are still figuring out. But our best take on that right now is that this entire community, what it graduates into, so everyone who comes from through one of our cohort and graduates into this community, then gets plugged into a specific project that is happening on climate across the world. That's kind of the long-term vision. So for example, what that might mean is that you could, if you're an entrepreneur, then you would be originating that project that will sit on top of this community, where this community will now become your sourcing for all the talent, all the expertise, all the customer discovery that you would want to do. But if you were, for example, running, I don't know, your project drawdown, right? So we'll go to project drawdown, and drawdown needs someone to build a better model for identifying methane emissions from satellite data of natural gas pipelines, right? So that project will sit on Terra, and the entire community, which has been through this entire vetting process, because they've been through this program, et cetera, would be now able to put their hand up and say, I want to work on that project. These are my skills. And this online space will become this collaboration space for all of these individuals to start working on these problems. That's kind of the vague idea. The reason for doing it online is like two reasons. One is that obviously it gives you infinite access to talent all across the world, right? So you could have a guy sitting in India or Ghana working on that project drawdown project, and not just the Google engineers that we have here in Silicon Valley. But the second is that our hope is that that'll allow a lot of transfer to happen. So for example, if you crack a specific problem around methane emissions in the US using US satellite data, similar satellite data is available for India, similar satellite data is available for Kazakhstan. Is there a way that if it's an online community, is there a way that that entire learning or some large part of it could be transported very, very quickly through an entrepreneur or an organization sitting in those countries? So in a way, it's a way to disseminate all the climate knowledge and project work that we are doing separately in our own separate niches geographically right now, and it's just spread them out over the internet. So that's kind of the grand vision of why this community matters, and why it's a Terra.do as opposed to Terra.learn.
And there, I mean, obviously will always be infinite problems to solve in this space, whether it's, how to use LiDAR or satellite imaging to find fugitive emissions from satellites, or solving energy independence issues for Caribbean nations or something like that. Did you take inspiration from? I mean, I'm guessing there are other platforms for this in other niche industries that are maybe doing something similar, or was this more of a bespoke concept? I mean, are there other industries or platforms that you could point to that say, hey, we looked at this and this was inspiring to us because of what they do?
Hi, Jason.
Hey, Jason.
No, there's a ton of stuff out there. So for example, the very first inspiration was Climate Collab from MIT, which started almost a decade ago. And so they've done a bunch of interesting stuff. I think the fire in that project has kind of died down for a variety of different reasons, but there were a lot of interesting learnings from that. Then there are a bunch of these project-based kind of models, right? So either challenges. I mean, you can go from an X Prize to a Kaggle to a smaller niches like Omdena. I don't know if you guys have heard of these companies, but Omdena, for example, focuses on AI for SDG goals and online projects that people could work on. And part of it is that if you look at all of these are both instructive in the fact that people have thought about this idea and they saw some traction, but they're also instructive in the sense that, well, none of them are monster organizations or companies that we now cite all the time, like we would for Wikipedia, right? They look at Wikipedia as kind of the shining example of what could happen if 10,000 strangers congregate to build the world's knowledge, right? All of these are actually counterfactuals almost, which is that you don't go back and say, well, look at how Kaggle has changed the world of how machine learning was done. Right? So therefore, there is something fundamentally unsolved about strangers collaborating to solve hard problems. And I'm sure we'll run into the same problems ourselves. And we don't have answers to that yet. So I think hopefully we'll figure it out along the way.
Excellent. I didn't realize the sort of differentiation between a learning platform and a doing platform, and I think it's fantastic. And just that fact adds a ton of value for your participants, because not only can they learn, but it might be a place to find future work in whatever field they specialize in. So that's excellent. I mean, many of us, I'm guessing, have gone to universities, and they sort of claim to do that and help you with job placement things along the way. I haven't experienced much of that assistance moving forward, and not that I've relied on it, but it seems like it seems very visceral and very real that you can actually find teams to collaborate with assistants or or gainful employment once going through this pretty brief educational course. It's a ton of value add. John, I want to ask you a little bit. This has sort of been I'll call it a passion project, but correct me if you want to call it something different. I don't know if you're getting course credit for it. I mean, I think it's great, and I think what both of you have done is leverage just the huge volume of work that's out there, and clearly it's work to go through all that, whether it's videos or academic papers or something else, and kind of figure out what is a easily digestible and succinct overview of whatever module you're trying to teach on. But John, what are your plans, or have even just where has your brain gone as far as what comes next for the Carbon Removal Academy? And do you see maybe that there would be a business in this for you?
Yeah, so I definitely have thought there, have talked about it with a few people, and I think there's a few interesting ideas here. I do like the current model of having content curated. I mean, I'll come back to that in a second, but I do like having sort of an initial base layer of curated material that isn't what people would be paying for. So I think ultimately, especially if my job is to find and compile the best pre-existing resources on climate stuff or carbon removal stuff, then I'm not going to be the one saying, okay, you want to access this? That'll be $100. Like, that's a little silly. So I think ultimately what people would be paying for is the learning experience. So the sort of whole ecosystem that you can build around that, whether it consists of cohorts or discussions, and we'll get into what I'm thinking. But it's sort of a baseline curriculum that anyone can access, and then you sort of sign up in order to really deeply engage with your specific niche. So sort of what I'm thinking there is, well, for starters, I should say that I've been actively trying to apply the Carbon Removal Academy's sort of style curriculum to other pieces of climate. So I'm actually launching within the next 2 weeks a broader platform called Climate Change Academy, which includes Carbon Removal Academy, but also has another segment on clean energy and another segment on the grid, just because in terms of raw demand, I've heard people say, wow, this is great. Is there more of this? So trying to produce more while I've learned. So trying to hype up the volume while at the same time still staying largely focused on carbon removal. I'm not planning on charging for a little while I get it right, but here's some sort of loose thoughts on how it would work. I sort of picture the carbon removal education, especially with this target audience or climate, I guess, in general, to have sort of two distinct axes, where one axis is sort of the type of person that we're talking about. So whether that's an activist or an entrepreneur or a software developer or a finance person or whatever sort of or even a student, like whatever your point of view is coming in to the educational space. Because that certainly informs how you think about problems, what you want to get out of it, where you want to go from there. So that's sort of a key factor. And then the other key factor is sort of like which areas of climate or which sub areas of climate you want to focus on. So even within carbon removal, some people might just be inherently drawn to direct air capture, or some people inherently drawn to soil. Like I think it's just people are sort of have definitive ideas about where they want to focus their time. I've heard from a software developer who really wants to go work on smart grid technologies. So like, there's sort of these two axes that you sort of think about, and each person might be a point or have a few points on this graph. And ultimately, one model that I think would provide value for these types of people is sort of building courses at different points within that matrix. So how would you do a course that is carbon removal for entrepreneurs or carbon removal for software developers? Something like that, where the base material stays the same. You still, whether you're a software developer or you're an entrepreneur or you work in finance or you're an activist, you still have to know how soil carbon works. You still have to know the basic science behind direct air capture in order to be fluent in it. You still have to have the same baseline assumptions going into it. But then if you're specifically targeting content towards specific customer segments, then you can start acting like the safari leader, or, you know, you're taking these people on a journey through the segments, but rather than just sort of being generic and talking about the same things to every distinct group of people, you can sort of point out along the way what exists. So if you're let's say, take carbon removal for entrepreneurs, as you go through the different modules, you can start being the safari leader and pointing out, hey, you see that? That's an opportunity, and here's what people are doing, but, you know, here are some unexplored spaces, and if you want to focus your attention here, you should reach out to this person. If you're not interested, well, the safari's moving on pretty quickly, you might be interested in the next thing. For software developers or people doing machine learning, there's data here, there's data here, you know, remote sensing needs work, verification, you know, there's all these, throughout the horizontal, there's so many different places where on that safari you could say, check this out, this is cool. So you start applying a lens to the learning experience, which I think sort of amplifies the value that potential customers could get out of it. And then in terms of customer acquisition, I think it just comes down to marketing in those particular spaces. So saying, hey, you know, are you a person who wants to come work on climate with this background? Boy, do we have the thing for you, because specifically designed for people in your position. Or another sort of horizontal type of person is, you know, early career people just coming out of college. I think there are a lot of people who are sort of wandering, just coming out of college, not quite sure what they want to go work on, with various backgrounds. I mean, I've heard from a few designers who want to get involved in climate. Like, can you do climate for designers? Maybe that's too niche, but, you know, climate for creatives, perhaps. Like, you start thinking about these customer segments, and you could really design specific learning experiences that have different products, different speakers, or projects, different speakers, different vantage points based on who you're trying to specifically, you know, reach, and who you're specifically trying to convert. Because again, the goal of this is to answer the question, like, how can I, where I is generic, like a person, use my skills, my brain and abilities to make a dent in this climate problem? Because that's what we all care about. So then the question is, how can we convert those people and get them to use their skill sets? So then the two criteria again are hype them up, get them all ready to go work on this. So maybe that's a different target audience altogether, which is a different conversation, I guess. So, you know, looking at the people who don't care about climate and saying, hey, here's why it matters. Maybe that's a public information campaign or whatever it is, but not quite the same idea. But once you get that hype and you get that initial sparked interest, even if it's just, I want to invest a little bit of money to learn more and figure out whether this is right for me, whether I actually want to continue down this path or maybe not. So if you light that spark, then you get people maybe to start with you, start down your path, get them excited as you go through good material, good conversations, interesting ideas that spark their imaginations, and specifically targeted towards their skill sets, so that they realize, hey, I could actually make a dent here. This is something where I might specifically be useful. Does that answer the question?
Yes, sir. John, that's great. It's brilliant. I mean, you guys are, both of you are solving clearly defined problems for people, which is, how do I start my climate journey, to borrow a phrase that's already in use, and then sort of the efficiency of specialization that you're looking at, John, in the future is great. I think, you know, I love matrices, and just the view of like, I'm a creative and I want to do something, you know, carbon removal or wherever that overlap is, and giving people content that's very specific and tailored to them. It's going to take you far. I've been talking a lot, and I wanted to make sure, you know, if other folks have, and we've got a few minutes left. Do either of our guests today have to leave at the top of the hour?
I can stay for 10 more minutes, but
Okay.
after that I do have to jump off. Sorry.
Yeah, me too.
Time. Thank you. But yeah, I just wanted to see if anyone else had specific questions or things they wanted to dig into.
I have a question about trying to reach college students, because I have talked to several other college students in my community, and they either just found out about carbon removal or have never heard of it before. So I'm wondering what both of you, I know Anshuman, maybe this is a little bit of a different target customer segment, but how are both of you trying to reach the college students? Because I think there is an excellent opportunity there to get some young people who have a lot of energy and their whole careers ahead of them involved in this space early, but there isn't necessarily that background or education within their own field related to climate. So I'm just curious on what you guys think about that.
I would love to actually kind of counter that with a question, which is what do you think it would be the best way to reach college students? Because it's exactly what we are also thinking about. Jack, you had a point?
I was waving goodbye to Brett.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
No worries. I think one thing that we're trying is that there are a lot of either climate / environment / sustainability / now carbon clubs in colleges. And what I noticed, and I've noticed this at Stanford as well, which is that when they start out at the beginning of the year, there are like 600 people who will show up for the very first mixer. And of course, now it's all virtual and so on. And by the time the year is over, there are like these 50 diehards who are still like plugging away. And for them, it's extremely valuable because as a club leader or somebody who's participating, there's this entire network that you can build out. But to me, that loss of the 550 people along the way seems like a shame. And part of it, I mean, I've run student clubs myself in college many years ago, and I can see that it's hard to keep the programming running throughout the entire year. So is there a way to look at clubs and see, can you semi-structure them so that there's almost like this 12-month period where you could be exploring all these different niches that John is building out or I'm building out. And maybe that's one vector, but yeah, would love to hear more ideas.
Maybe I'll just quickly jump in here because this is something I've been actively working on too. I'm trying, at least right now, specifically for carbon removal, to build out a separate group of sort of task force oriented college students who want to jump in cross colleges. The goal being like sort of with that same problem that Anshuman brought up in mind, that there's such attrition with the people. Like you have to capture people so quickly, otherwise their interest fades off if there's not like a specific community, a specific program, and a specific reason for them to be there, right? So I think community is huge. If you can help people find their people within the space and their friends, their types of content, they're having fun, they're engaged, then they're much more likely to continue in that space. I know that just, I'm a college student now, so I'm also running clubs that aren't related to carbon removal or climate at all. So finding and giving people that community is important, and then applying those skills to particular problems while working together with other college students sort of reinforces that community while reinforcing the need and the will for action. So I think in terms of finding them, going out to colleges, but then also just sort of direct personal outreach is a great way to get started. Like it doesn't really scale, but hey, you want to get involved? Great, we'd love to have you. Get them into the funnel, and then have them to find their 5 friends who want to get involved. And I'm having so much fun. I'm learning so much. I'm making a difference. Do you want to join? And then it just sort of grows by word of mouth, which I think is ultimately the way that this could get bigger.
For a lot of online learning platforms, whether they're coding boot camps or something else, even open source MIT classes, attrition rates have been very high. I'm wondering, Anshuman, clearly dropping, $1,000 is going to help people to stay motivated. But there's, I'm sure, other motivating factors along the way. I mean, how are you? I don't know. How are you all thinking about attrition, or is that a problem even to worry about?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. I think that number, the 9% completion rates or 12%, depending on which MOOC you're talking about, is entirely the case for self-learning platforms, which have no kind of high touch involved at all. The numbers for example, Udacity's Nano Degree, which is probably closer to how Terra does things, with mentors, with instructors, etc., are in the 80 to 85% range. So it's a complete world of difference. In fact, in a way, this whole new kind of thinking around online education, which is saying, well, online education was this amazing thing. And when MOOCs came out, I still remember how excited I was about how this is going to completely transform the world. And in a way, MOOCs did to online education what Google Glass did to augmented reality and virtual reality, which is that it was such a subpar experience that people just got, like, after the novelty was over, people just got turned off. Thankfully, with COVID, at least online education has come back. I don't know about, I mean, I would love to get VR to also come back. I just love that whole space. But yeah, so I think it's a very different world altogether where you have a high touch. The problem then it becomes the other way around, which is how do you scale something like this? If you have a person who's kind of checking in on you on a regular enough basis, holding you accountable, that is how education has been done for hundreds of years, thousands of years. So how do you scale that up on the internet in a way which does not take away that human touch? That, I think, is a beautiful technology problem to solve.
Yeah. So this isn't okay. So I've been a big fan of MOOCs literally since they've come out. So quick plug here that has nothing to do with anything climate related, I guess. But one of the big issues that I've found with MOOCs these days is that the move has been, just because business models have necessitated it, like to move from synchronous content to asynchronous content. So most MOOCs used to be cohorts where it was like, all right, we're going to start now. 10 weeks later, this course ends, and we're going to have a discussion as it goes. And the professors will be engaged in the forums, and people will be working, and you can't join until the next cohort starts. Whereas now, just because of the way the revenue model works, where people want to sign up at random different times throughout the year, do their 2 weeks worth of intense work and quit, like everything is switched to be, you know, all these materials are always available. You can work through them at your own pace. And I think that has been the fundamental reason, or a fundamental reason for the attrition, because A, there's no accountability, but B, there's no community. Like, you know, it's very hard to find people on a lot of these, like Coursera is my favorite MOOC platform, but like it's very hard to find people working on these Coursera courses with you when the discussion forums are empty, when it's an asynchronous, just, you know, video list with no group of people moving through it with you. So I think the number one way, in my opinion, to fix the attrition problem is to build community and build people working through it with you. And the quick plug, which again has nothing to do with any of this, is there's basically only a few Coursera courses that still have preserved their synchronous quality. And one of them, which actually starts tomorrow, is a modern and contemporary American poetry class, which I've been following for a very long time and is very engaging. But is every September, they have a 10-week course where they move through the material together with community. And the reason it works is because everybody is there, everybody is talking, and they are so good at encouraging discussion and encouraging, you know, that group mindset rather than the individual mindset.
I had a question. I'll throw it out to the group. John, I'm interested, just an observation, I'm interested that your initial focus was carbon, decarbonization, carbon removal, whatever you want to call it. And it's also interesting to me to hear that you're going to possibly focus on separate tracks, which involve more of a climate change education track and an energy track. I mean, creating those silos is interesting. On a broader question, how much of Anshuman, how much of your program focuses on the climate science? I typed that up at the beginning of the session, and John already addressed it. But versus actionable real-world solutions like implementing sustainability in your organization or your real life, it seems like there's very much different silos in the world we're in from an educational standpoint. And climate science is one, and John's initial academy focused on the carbon component, but kind of left the basic piece, which was understanding the climate science back there, assuming everybody kind of had that piece, and let's figure out this decarbonization component. And then even the decarbonization component has multiple pieces. There's the decarbonize our economy versus decarbonizing my life versus decarbonizing our atmosphere. I mean, there's different pieces, and they each have a different outcome and a different track. So it's such a broad area. That's a rambling question, but take it and run with it in whatever way you want.
And
So,
Anshuman,
Jack,
maybe
so I think,
you answer quickly or first, because I know you've got to jump and yeah, out of
yeah.
respect and gratitude for your time. Why don't you go and then feel free to leave us when you're ready.
Okay, I'll just take this question and then I'll have to jump off. But so
Thank you.
Jack,
Sorry to make it so long.
no, not at all. In fact, I think it's a very pertinent question. And this is coming in as an outsider, which is one of the biggest observations for me was that how many rifts and dividing lines were inside the climate world. So you would have the Ernie Munez view of the world, which is the fundamental problem with climate is innovation. We'll innovate our way out of it, and technology is going to be an important role. There is the Naomi Klein world, which is this is a fundamental colonialism slash global south, global north kind of a disparity problem. We'll transfer hundreds of billions of dollars across these two divides and the rest shall follow. Or it's an economics problem, Nordhaus level, right? Which is that put carbon tax, have the right incentives, the rest shall follow. And the reality is that it's all of the above, right? And that's something which we were very keen on. In fact, part of the reason for trying to build a foundational 101 program that spans across the entire spectrum, even though even at the risk of over broadening the program, was precisely this, because we wanted to break these boundaries from day one. And not just, and obviously I come from India. So my other pet peeve was that there is no talk about adaptation and resilience in the way Indians and Bangladeshis understand it in the US, right? When we talk about adaptation and resilience, we're talking about how Miami's condos and real estate is going to get hammered because of rising seas, which is a very different problem compared to 1/3 of my country is going to be submerged within the next couple of years, or even now, right now. So therefore, our program is very broad-based. However, one of our biggest beliefs, and maybe that's because my co-founder comes from that academic background, is that climate science underpins all of this. So therefore, we actually spend an inordinate amount of time on climate science in our program. So we have roughly 18 to 20 classes, depending on how you count it. 3 of them are spent on climate science right at the beginning. And this is just like that Stephen Hawking quote when he wrote that book, Brief History of Time, that his publisher told him that every single equation that you put in that book is going to half your sales. And knowing that, we said it's really important for people to get into what climate models are all about, because a lot of what informs your decision making about policy frameworks out over the next 10, 15 years, or where the opportunities might lie, have their basis in some climate model that you have just taken for granted right now. So therefore, we spend a lot of time. We have this amazing speaker who also comes in, this guy called Chip Fletcher, who's a professor at the University of Hawaii. And he's a oceans expert. And ocean is one of the major few unresolved problems in climate science right now. And he does this amazing talk where he just talks about what we know and what we don't know about the oceans. And by the way, all the ones that we don't know about the oceans are also on the negative downside side, as opposed to some potential upside that might come from oceans being a better carbon sink that we had thought that they would be. So net, I think it's important to get the climate science right, and we emphasize quite a bit on that. Okay, I gotta run, but thank you so much for having me, Jeremy, and great seeing you again, John, and thanks for all of you for taking the time.
Anshuman, we appreciate you. Thanks so much for sharing your experiences, and we'll be in touch.
Sounds good.
Take
care. Bye.
All right. Well, we are kind of bumping up against 15 past. John, I just want to give you a chance if there's anything you wanted to leave us with, or something you wanted to add to Jack's last question.
Yeah, I mean, maybe on Jack's question, I think ultimately it comes down to sort of where you are in the funnel, strategically at least for the experience. Because if you're already somebody that's hyped up to work on climate and just want to learn about entrepreneurial opportunities, or just want to learn about specific places to get involved, I'm not sure that giving the whole 2 degrees Celsius spiel for the 15th time is going to be all that influential. Maybe if you're offering a specific targeted segment about climate modeling, then there's something to be said there. But we have limited time in any of these sorts of programs. And I think at least where my thinking is, and I'm open to feedback about this, the best place to spend that time is on the things that the people don't already know and care about. So while you still tie it back to the climate science, because that's sort of it's all in service of that. It's all in service of working on that, sort of having that be a motivating point rather than sort of a key component in the content maybe.
I like the idea that you're pursuing of having different on-ramps for different folks at different stages of evolution in their knowledge about the subject. I think that's smart and probably a good business model. And like you're right, everybody's different in their knowledge and their perspective and the silo they throw themselves in and where they want to focus. So it actually opens a can of worms for you, or if people like you are focused on the educational element of this. Where do you what funnel do you use? Where do you put them? I mean, it's a long tail, right? So yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. That's certainly something to think about and figure out the best way to do, but for sure.
I have one other question for Duncan. What audience are you targeting for your movie?
Good question. I've loved this discussion. Thank you so much for allowing me to be part of it. It's really allowed me to think about all the different levels of audience, from people who are just interested in the entrepreneurial possibilities to experts. My audience would be broad audience. So I'm interested in the very same thing as Terra.do, as well as Carbon Removal Academy. I mean, I want to evangelize. I want to, spread the good word, have people learn about this, have more people get engaged. And it's coming from my heart, and I want to reach other people's heart through their minds. And so, I guess what I'm looking at is finding the stories. Who are the heroes? What's the narrative that can be spun around carbon removal? Just because that's, as a filmmaker, I feel like that's how we augment information retention, is that if rather than bombarding them with big data and tech, tell them the story. How did it come about? Where is it going? Where's the dilemma? Where's the resolution? And this is what I'm trying to do, is the more I learn, the more I find out what the big story is and who the players are and what's going to allow people to really feel around this. And if they feel, I feel like they're going to get more involved. So I'm looking for the biggest and broadest audience possible.
Very cool. Good answer.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Jack, and Duncan. I hope to see your face again. Glad to have you in the group. So,
yeah, that's been awesome. Thank you so much for this whole thing. It's really terrific. I learned so much every time.
That's great. Yeah. So I'd have to look at the schedule. I believe we're up for next Friday. I believe we have scheduled a gentleman who's got a software platform and basically some code that allows for carbon removal based offsets sort of at the point of sale, or at least it's calculated at the point of sale, which has huge implications for the world of e-commerce. So again, I'll have to go back and check my schedule. I haven't looked at what's up next week, but I believe that's our subject matter. That'll all be out in the Slack channel. And any follow-up questions or discussion on this, let's do that in Slack this week. Look forward to having some lively conversation there. And we'll see y'all next time.
See you guys.
Thanks.
Good. See ya.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.